Tonight on Cosmic Cantina, in anticipation of the official UAP report, we decided not to discuss the possible government agenda, but rather dive into Richard Dolan's latest book and talk about the alien agendas. We interview the man himself to explore his speculative analysis of the motives behind alien-human encounters. Are we simply the playthings of godlike race of beings? Do they want to help? Or could they care less about our human progress? We may never know the truth, but that obviously won't stop us from throwing around wild theories. I'm your host, Melissa Tittle, and every week I go to my favorite bar, Cosmic Cantina, and kick back with my co-hosts, Josh Golembeski and Matt O'Connor. We talk about aliens, Bigfoot, ghosts, ancient cultures, and anything from the unseen world that needs a little illumination. Welcome to Cosmic Cantina. I'm your host, Melissa Tittle, and tonight I am drinking a little Sapporo. What's up?
Ooh, that's
Japanese
different.
Beer. Spice it up a bit.
That is one of my favorites. Well played. I went to, it's my first day back at the office since coming home from Australia. So I needed a little something stronger. So I poured myself a little Breckenridge whiskey.
Wait, whoa.
Not the whole glass. That's a lot of whiskey. I poured a little, there's a little splash of ginger ale on top.
Wait, Matt,
That's not all whiskey.
Did you take the Breckenridge whiskey from the table outside my office because I'm leaving and I'm giving away all my stuff? Was that?
Oh, did you have some there?
Yeah.
No, I don't know what you're talking about.
Oh, yeah. Let's quickly...
Busted.
It's so smooth.
Well, let's.
Okay.
I'm
Kinda
drinking random red wine in a jar. Let's cheers to Melissa's last week in the office and Matt's return.
Hey.
Cheers to
Last
us.
week
Yeah.
at Gaia. What's up?
Right on.
But I'm
Right
still
on.
going to be in the world of weird. Don't worry. I have lots of exciting things coming out that I can't tell you yet. But
Ooh.
stay tuned. I will
Intriguing.
not be far from the world of strangeness. Speaking of
Right.
strangeness, so on the day of the 25th today, which is the day when all the magical things come out, we actually have pre-recorded this show on Monday of this week. But you are now listening to it on the 25th. And on the 25th, instead of trying to predict exactly what they were going to say in these documents, we decided to do an exclusive interview with Richard Dolan. If you don't know who Richard Dolan is, he has written an amazing book called The Alien Agenda. And I think it's a really interesting thing to talk about because we all think there's a government agenda, but what if there's an alien agenda?
And
Yes.
seriously, if you don't know who Richard Dolan is, what's wrong with you? This guy's a legend. I love his work. Mm-hmm. Sorry. Carry on.
And we actually dissected this book because there's so many amazing cases in this book. And so I know the guys have some interesting things to say.
Yeah, I found, I got to the book pretty late, pretty recently, as in like several hours ago. So I was like just peeling through the book trying to find some... a Matt story, specifically a Matt story. Mm-hmm. So something a little creepy, a little off-putting, and I think I found a perler, as they say in Australia. So, stick around. Stick around for one of those. That's what I got.
Okay, I don't
Well,
know what
right
that
on.
is, but I think it's something. Anyway, Josh, speak
was like a
English,
good-
please.
That was so teasy. It gave nothing away. I love this book. It's my favorite ufology book I've read in the last couple of years. Don't be confused with Alien Agenda by Jim Mars. Another good book, a little darker, but still a cool book from a long time ago. This is Alien Agendas with an S by Richard Dolan. And it's so wonderful because he breaks down the best information and then does what we all want to do is speculate about what could be going on. He doesn't claim anything's real. He doesn't claim he knows the answer. He's just speculating on the best information. And there's so many nuggets in this book that I could go off on tangents, but I found a perfect Cosmic Cantina story from Australia about an abductee, a contactee with a wild sex story with aliens and actual evidence of this encounter.
That does sound Australian. It really does.
I wonder if people just have like random sexual experiences and don't really want to admit them. So they're just like, well, I just had sex with aliens and it was a really crazy night.
Yeah. I wouldn't. If that happened to me, everyone would know about it. Just to be clear, you would definitely find out about that.
I think if you had any kind of okay, never mind.
If I had any sex, you'd hear about it.
Hasn't happened yet, but we're getting there.
All right, so let's just get into this. I had this amazing interview with Richard Dolan, and as Josh said, he's written this amazing book called Alien Agendas, and Richard Dolan has written a lot of really great books in this space, and he comes from an authority of not saying that one side is true or the other. He just kind of presents the facts. He has an amazing way of stating things like a professor and really getting into the nitty-gritty of what could be going on. So let's dive into the interview. Welcome to the show, Richard.
Hi, Melissa. Thanks for having me on.
All right, so Richard has written an amazing new book called The Alien Agenda, and if you haven't checked it out, you have to. It's absolutely fascinating. We are on the cusp of what the government is supposed to release on the 25th, all the documents that they possibly have on and their opinion on what might be happening in the sky. But Richard's book really dives into possibly an agenda from the other side. So, on a bigger level, there's a lot of really interesting things in this book, but and there's definitely, according to lots of people, different alien groups coming here, having contact with different humans, and there's many stories. What, in your opinion, is the alien agenda?
I think there's probably more than one alien group, and I think there's more than one alien agenda. When I look over all of I wrote this book, incidentally, because I've been in the UFO field for such a long time, and I've always focused on as much verifiable information as I can. So that basically has to do with the human side of the cover-up, the politics of the UFO phenomenon, sightings, reports, things like that, with minimal speculation about who these other beings are, other than my conclusion that they're not us, they're not from around here, whatever here is. But I decided last fall that I wanted to go a little bit further and look at this as, like, how would a counterintelligence officer look at this data? If you had to figure out, like, who are these guys? Why are they here? I thought to myself, I've been researching this long enough. I'm going to give it my best shot. And that's why I wrote that book. So I worked off of what I felt were reliable or reasonably reliable cases of encounters and to piece together a story. And so what I believe right now is that there are several different types of beings that have been interacting with us. One is totally human looking. They look just like you and me. And I think we've been interacted with by them probably for thousands of years. It's just my best guess. I believe that interaction has been primarily benign and primarily observational, like a monitoring type of a process. And I say this because there are some very interesting ancient stories that, at least when I read it, seem to indicate that. There are no reliable accounts in ancient times of human beings interacting with, say, gray aliens. There's just nothing. I haven't found a single one that I thought was reliable prior to, about a century ago. Similar with like insectoid type beings or with reptilian type beings. Now, reptilian, you could argue there's ancient, like, Sumerian and Akkadian reptilian types of imagery. I don't find that very convincing evidence for my part, but maybe you can make an argument otherwise. But for the most part, I'm not seeing a lot of different types of aliens until recently. But recently, not only do we get other types of alien encounters, but we're getting just massive numbers of UFO sightings in general. So I think something happened. And I think what happened is that, we discovered science and we discovered advanced technology. And I think that brought a lot of the neighborhood in to take a look at us. Where our progress for thousands and thousands of years, human beings, our society is basically horses pulling wooden carts. That was basically human beings for many thousands of years. Before that, hundreds of thousands of years of just hunters and gatherers. And then suddenly, in the last 150 years, look what we did. We go from industrialization to trains to automobiles, flight, missiles, computers, atomic bombs, iPhones and the web and all this massive data crunching and internet that we have now, we're looking at less than a generation from now from having super strong, artificially intelligent, generative AI that can think maybe better than we can, and bioengineering, like transhumanism, and beyond. Like, good Lord, what we've been able to do in the blink of a cosmic eye is astonishing. It's not incremental. So we're actually about to leap right into their world. That's actually the thing. Like, it's when people say, oh, we could never catch up with super advanced aliens because we must be like insects to them, I think that's absolute nonsense. I think the reality is they have probably mastered certain sciences that we are about to master. And we're going to put ourselves at a level of some kind of parity with them. This is what I believe. I don't think we're going to be playing catch up forever. So if I were them, if I were a super intelligent telepathic alien that had the ability to look at all of these little humans scurrying around and suddenly doing the things that they're doing, I would want to monitor that. I might want to influence that. I might even want to infiltrate, or I would certainly want to, if I could manage that process, because I wouldn't want them to be disruptive to whatever it is that I'm doing. That's what I think. So I think part of the agenda of what we say are the gray aliens, which very well may be related to the insect type aliens, the mantid beings. I think that's not the worst argument. I think they are here possibly for that reason. I think that's probably the best reason. We don't have any interactions with them from ancient times, but we're having interactions with them now at this moment in our insane transformation as a civilization and as a species. So I think it's related to that.
That's really interesting. I mean, that makes total sense to me. I mean, a lot of people are focused on, what are the governments of the world? What's their agenda? I mean, do you think that from your research, you think the governments of the world are working together with these aliens, or does everybody have a separate agenda?
No, I think that's a great question, by the way. Most of the governments of the world are subservient to the United States structure of power. So they don't really have a lot of independence. There's not really a lot of sovereignty. Like, we pretend that there's all of these separate nations out there, but they're, other than China, other than Russia, other than Iran, a couple of other nations, most are integrated in one way or another with the United States national security intelligence complex. They have some leeway, yeah, but they're also deeply embedded. So the U.S. has tremendous power over that. But also, there's a lot of power that's decentralized through private corporations, and that the U.S. Government structure and military structure is basically playing security for these private corporations. We're talking Boeing, Lockheed, Raytheon, TRW, all of those guys. And so where that full, like the center of power is a really good question. And I ask myself this all the time. But you're asking about other countries. Yes, I think there's varying levels of cooperation, varying levels of how much these other countries know. But I want to keep in mind something, like when we talk about countries, are we really talking about anything at all that's meaningful? Like, we talk about the United States government. I would answer, what is even the United States government? You've got this labyrinth, this incredibly intricate Byzantine maze of all these structures of power that goes in all these different directions. And it's not really clear to me that there's like a unified plan coming out of Washington. Is Joe Biden in charge of this? Was Donald Trump in charge of this when he was president? Like, who's running the show? And when we talk about other countries, it's the same question. So there's this, I guess what I'm saying is, I don't believe that we in our world have a genuinely accurate understanding of the true structure of power as it exists on planet Earth. I just don't think we have even a clue. We talk about these nations as if they actually mean something. And in fact, we're creating something totally different. And most of us are just playing catch up to that. So there is international cooperation, yes, to some significant extent. But whether actually national governments have much to do with it, or whether we're talking private entities that are international. I'll give you a perfect example. So all of like the U.S. classified, you go to like Area 51. All right. Mm-hmm. So that's a U.S. government controlled site by the Department of Energy for the most part. But when you go in there and go into the laboratories and talk about all the people who are doing the work in there, they're all private companies. And they get the security provided for them by the U.S. government. And so what are they doing? That's a really good question. And who are they working for?
So you're basically saying kind of what you're saying with the alien agenda is that there's so many different agendas even on planet Earth. There just isn't one. People want to have one, but maybe there's several by several people in power and whatever faction they are. And the same thing with an alien agenda. They want to monitor, but in their own way and whatever they want to get out of it. Is that
Possibly,
is that what you're saying?
possibly, yeah, possibly, yeah. I think there may be like one. I'm speaking about humanity here. There may be one central group. Like, let's say there's an MJ12 type of international organization. Maybe they go by a different name. Probably they do. They could very well exist, and they would very probably be mostly private, international, with massive money and massive power and tremendous influence within the U.S. government. I think that's the most likely scenario if there's a central control group.
But, you know, when it comes to the idea of disclosure, since, 25th is upon us.
Yeah.
Do you have any opinions on this? You know, I know the book is about an alien agenda, but everybody's got an agenda.
The task force report?
Yeah. So what is
absolutely.
the agenda of the task force report versus the alien agenda?
Well, so we're in totally different universes here. The task force report, from what I have been told, and I think this is from Elizondo himself, I think it's supposed to be 78 pages long, which is not that thick. My own estimate is it's probably at least 25% padding in that thing. They usually are, these bureaucratic things. So let's say there's 50 pages of actual data in there that go back, we're told, 20 years. Now, the New York Times a few weeks ago said that there were 120 cases in that. I've been told that that's incorrect and that it's actually fewer than that. I don't know how much fewer. So we're not really talking about a lot of cases. I mean, look, for example, the National UFO Reporting Center reports like 8,000 cases on their website alone every year. Mm-hmm. Granted, most of them haven't been investigated. Most are probably mundane, but there's some really good ones on there. And MUFON gets its own amount. And then you think about what the military, they've got geosynchronous satellites, they've got all kinds of ground-based systems. You're going to tell me they've only had about 100 UFO cases in the last 20 years? Like, not a chance. They got vastly more. So this task force, you got a couple of people involved, from what I can see, who we don't even know if they've had decent enough security clearances to be able to go into the labyrinth of the Pentagon. So what are they really getting access to? Probably not a lot. And so they will, we're told, this is in advance, that they're going to rule out, or they're going to say that there's no evidence that the technology that they've encountered is U.S. secret tech. That's the one conclusion I'm told that they're going to have. Okay. And now,
but they can't conclude that it's alien, but it could be, right?
Of course it is. Of course, a lot of it's alien, and I mean, I don't think there's any question. But I think they're also, I think a lot of it probably is U.S. tech, but it's how they legalistically define that. Mm-hmm. So is it U.S. government tech? First of all, do they even really have a position that they can know this for sure? That's one question. But even if they rule out U.S. tech, what about private corporation tech that works under the aegis of U.S. military protection? Mm-hmm. What if it's Lockheed, in other words? What if it's Boeing? Like, there's probably a really good case to be made that Lockheed has had a very, very advanced tech that they're not telling anyone else about. Hell, it was Lockheed. That's the story of the 1988 ARV, the Alien Reproduction Vehicle, which I think is true. So,
I mean, could it be possible that the alien agenda is to monitor us, and quite possibly we are trying to catch up with them to monitor them? Is this, if you really think about the agenda, instead of everybody thinking it's the agenda is to keep everything secret, is it literally one species monitoring the other?
I've often wondered this myself. In other words, like, if you go back in time and pretend you're Harry Truman, and it's the 1940s, and all of your people have said, "Boss, looks like there are aliens here." So what would you do? You might think, well, we got to figure this out, and we're going to keep this secret, and we're going to do our best to play catch up. Like, that would be a logical thing to do, and it's entirely possible that has been done. But then you have to wonder, and this gets into some really speculative possibilities. there are many accounts, and I wrote about in my book, in which it appears that there are totally human-looking aliens, for lack of a better word, that have infiltrated into our society. I know some people hearing that might think, well, that's insane. That's paranoia. What is this, invasion of the body snatchers? Look, I don't know. All I can say is I get very credible stories from people that I think are credible, who talk about ultra telepathic human-looking beings that don't seem like they come from our world. And it's not just me. There's a number of these that have come to other researchers. If that's true, then we're looking at infiltration. And if that is true, would there be infiltration at the highest levels of our decision-making apparatus? For example, 40 years ago, there was a first-rate remote viewer working with the CIA named Pat Price. He was probably murdered in 1975. That's my opinion. Price at one point did some remote viewing off the record for Hal Puthoff over at Stanford Research Institute back in the 70s. And Price just said, oh yeah, by the way, in my spare time, I remote viewed all the alien bases that are here on planet Earth. There's one in Mount Hayes, Alaska. There's one in the Pyrenees. There's one in Zimbabwe. There's one in Australia. And the one in Alaska, he said, was protected by the United States government. That's what he said. This is back in the 70s. Now, maybe Price was totally wrong, but I will say this. Price was an off-the-charts amazing remote viewer that everyone took seriously. And that's just one thing that he tossed off there. It got protection. If that type of scenario is true, then we're not really even in charge necessarily of our own policy, or we may not be. It's just something to think about. I hope that's not true. I just don't know. We're dealing with a hall of mirrors in this field. You've got intelligence community apparatus that's just, they have their own interest. There's been known disinformation that has come into the UFO field, and not just the famous examples of the, whether it's Richard Dolan and the MJ-12 documents, but there are, I think it's been throughout the history of UFOs, and it's very difficult to know like who to believe and who not to believe. I try to be careful, and it's tough for me. But I think that there's probably infiltration, yeah.
Yeah, so there's probably, and everybody should check out this book because it's just very fascinating. You found some amazing stories, and I know that as the podcast goes on, the guys are going to break down a lot of more stories that are in your book. But from a bigger perspective, the lines are so muddled from either side. Whether it's what's the government keeping from us, or why are the aliens even in contact with us? I mean, no one really has a clear answer. So again, it goes back to really, I think your bigger point of your book is that there's just an agenda from every side. It's not just one person. And so
that's right. And I think it's very likely that there are beings that look benignly or positively on us. I don't discount that at all. I think I would be surprised if there weren't at least one group that really likes us or that thinks of us as a promising project. You've got individuals around the world who have claimed that they've had some form of positive contact with other beings. Who am I to say that's not the case? Some of those claims seem less credible than others when I listen to them, but I don't say that they're all not credible. I think some of them are believable. Getting into an agenda, from any of these groups is a little more tricky. To me, the most important thing that we're going through isn't even necessarily an alien agenda. It could be, but the big thing that I think is going to override every single other factor is the transformation that we're going through as a civilization right now, which is this. Yeah, it's equivalent to what we did 10,000 years ago when we started the agricultural revolution. And it's more than equivalent to what we did when we did the industrial revolution a few centuries ago. This is something of equal or greater significance right now, because I think it's going to affect our whole species. And this is this transformation into some kind of very, to me, bizarre transhumanist future, which on a personal level, I don't really want any part of. I'll be happy to check out of this mortal coil as it gets full guns, maybe within 20 years. But the fact is, you're talking 24/7, 5G, 6G, 7G, whatever, interactivity, surveillance on every single person. You're talking about a completely centralized system of information control and massive cultural like enforce cultural transformation to accommodate that, and then an entire society essentially run by highly advanced artificial intelligent algorithms. Maybe this will be good for us. But then you're talking about bioengineering, where people will probably, want to live forever. Good luck with that. You probably lose your mind after 150 years. Like, you're probably not designed really to live forever. Let's face it. But all of these things are changing ourselves into something fundamentally different. And to me, that's the overwhelming reality of our time. And that I've come to understand an alien presence here as intimately connected to that transformation. I just can't see them separate.
Very interesting. All right, everybody, check out his book. We are going to break down more stories from his book in the rest of this podcast, but I wanted you to hear from Richard himself. Richard, thank you so much for being on our podcast, and I hope to see you soon.
Melissa, thank you very much for having me on here.
I just think it was really interesting that he was making the point that the agendas are based on our human progress, that they're interested in how we are taking our progress as humans and kind of infiltrating our society, our culture, our civilization to do that.
Yeah, I know Matt's going to dive into some crazy infiltration stories. I just love so much about that interview. I could break down everything he talked about. The Pat Price stuff is fascinating. And the one thing I thought was really interesting was the base in Alaska. And I've just seen a ton of stuff, especially in the TV and Unidentified, Luis Elizondo's show. They go into like lots of cases up there. And it just seems to be like one of the hotspots where these bases are that's supposedly been there since at least the 70s. So whatever's going on, if this infiltration's going on, this collaboration between us and the government, because he also goes into that. Like if you read the book, they go into like these seeing beings and government agents and different races in these bases. It just gives more credence to that. And the Pat Price stuff alone is worth investigating. But Matt, what do you got?
Oh man, I got some stuff. Yeah, I just wanted to say one thing I really loved, and it came through on the interview that you did, Melissa, with Dolan, that what I really appreciate with him as a researcher is that he really scrutinizes the evidence that comes in quotes. Like he really he's not afraid to say, yeah, I'm not buying it. That's just a little bit of bullshit.
He believes in the black satellite, though, Matt. So just to be super clear.
Wait, I didn't know that.
No, he doesn't.
No, he never said a thing about it.
Oh,
Does not. That would have been a good question, though.
oh my God. I think
That would have settled everything.
My other shoulder would have just fallen off of just I would just have like no shirt on. Okay. Anyway,
This is not
keep
that
going
kind
on.
of show. Well, Josh's did though. Anyway, so he sort of made mention of this kind of one of the possible agendas being that there is this kind of infiltration. Like he specifically said, there's like several groups that he believes may be infiltrating us. Some of them with more of a nefarious agenda in mind. Right. Others with, either neutral, like they're not really bothering with us. Maybe they just want resources or whatever. And the others, are possibly trying to help us. I like those ones. But
yes, me too.
The story that I kind of dug out of his book that really stood out to me as I was skimming through was, I think it reminded me a lot of, what's his face? Dr. Jacobs, David Jacobs.
Don't act like you forgot his name. You knew his name by heart.
Yeah,
I have it written down here, actually. I have forget David Jacobs' name. No, that's what stood out to me, because it was like, this is kind of creepy, but it also has this this kind of like odd, like funny interaction. I'll go into it. You be the judge. Here we go. I'm going to try and not like read this word for word, but I kind of broke it down into sections. So he tells a story. This lady came up to him after a talk he was giving, apparently, and she was an American lady. And this was the spring of '98, so this is a few years back. He calls her Lorraine. That's a pseudonym, obviously. But she was a young American college student in her 20s, and she was studying for a semester in the UK. So she takes this train that's going from London to Swansea, and she's trying to get to Swansea, which is in Wales. So it was late in the day, late in the afternoon, 5 or 6 p.m. And it's during the commuter rush, so this train car is packed. There's people everywhere. People standing up in the aisles. It's a packed car. So when she goes into the full car, she notices the seat open. And so she goes to sit down in the seat and kind of politely says there's a lady sitting next to her. And this lady was wearing a headscarf and gloves. Like she was just kind of, done up really nicely. Looked like she was heading home from the office. She was about in her 50s. And she said, ethnically, the woman looked Northern European. So she said to her politely, how are you? How's it going? And the woman faced her apparently, and she had these unusually large, unusually round, and with colors, her eyes, she was talking about, in colors that were brilliant. And she describes them as not hazel, but some combination of blue and brown. So she really notices the eyes, like they just stand out as like being odd.
I get that a lot.
Well, yeah.
Sure. Yeah.
Yeah, if one of us is an alien, it's definitely Melissa.
Of course.
Oh, definitely. Yeah.
Yeah.
Sorry, I just had to wet my whistle there for a second. So anyway, this woman's first response to her, which is interesting, little shoulder there from Josh, lovely. She says to her, "Oh." So
What?
Pretty average response to someone saying, "How's it going?" And then followed
That's
by
weird.
a polite reply. Maybe it just says "oh" like several O's and a couple of H's, so it was like "oh." I don't know. However you want to interpret that, it was just an odd way to start a sentence.
Oh, no, it's like
I don't think she
surprise.
was
Like, oh,
moaning.
you're talking to me. Oh,
Oh.
hi. Oh, this is when I pretend to be human. Okay, go on.
Surprise, yeah.
Yeah, again, all the time. Do that.
Yeah. That happens. People just moan at you. Oh. Oh, God. Guys, let's pull it out of the gutter.
Okay,
So
Australian.
anyway, what she says about, so this lady, gives her a polite reply. And what she says so they're in the middle of England, right? But this lady's accent, despite being in Western England, not far from Wales, she said the strange woman spoke in perfect Midwestern American dialect. In fact, she said specifically it sounded like it came from where she grew up, interestingly enough, in central Iowa, which is weird.
Weird.
Like that was
Very weird.
an odd little thing to have happened, right? So nothing much happens with this lady at the moment. And then she looks across from her, and this is the train car, so there's like two seats, and they're facing another two seats, and they're kind of facing each other. You know how trains work. Anyway, so the woman, there's another woman directly opposite her, right? And this woman she describes as she had dark curly hair, brown eyes, and generally seemed more normal looking. Yet here too, the eyes were unusual, protruding out more than usual, and looking very intense. And she says during the polite, brief exchange she has with the lady with the gloves and the scarf on her head, this strange woman leaned forward and was obviously like listening and like attentive and curious as to what they were saying, which is rude. And so she said this woman never spoke. She never said anything to either of them, but she just was like leaning in the whole time, like listening to their conversation, which is crazy. But she said she moved her head and mouth in ways that were strange in some elusive way. She looked at Lorraine, and in this really unsettling manner, like she really felt like creeped out by the way she was looking at her. Mm-hmm. So a couple odd people on the train. You've been on trains before. Odd people get on trains. That's fine. But I'll go on. Here's what happens next.
Uh-oh.
Lorraine looks around the car, and there's a man, around 30 years old, standing there reading a magazine. He looks over the top of the magazine at her and smiles. Just gives her an odd little smile, goes back to his magazine. Not too strange. She might be good looking, whatever. So another man, no more than 8 feet away, in another row, another aisle, he's looking directly at her, which she noticed as she kind of looks around, which is creepy. And oddly enough, this guy, she said, he was in his mid-40s. He was bald on top of his head, but he had this noticeable paunch in his belly, almost to the point of bloating. He may have been pregnant.
Sexy.
Yeah.
Dad
Sweet
bod.
dad
So
bod.
hot right now.
Yeah. But here's the really bizarre thing about this guy. She says,
This is all in Richard's book. This whole case, right?
"Oh yeah,
Yeah. Okay.
yeah, this is great stuff." Yeah. So here's where it gets very weird indeed. So she notices in particular this man's left index finger. She was astonished to see that it was unraveling. Oh, crazy, right? So it wasn't like bloody and gross, but the finger had a seam in it. So it was like there was this like fake skin on top, just like a cloth. It says she looked carefully, and what she saw unraveling was not medical sutures, but like thread. And it wasn't like it was a glove. Her eyesight was excellent. She knew what she was seeing. The skin of this man's hand appeared to be very silky and definitely synthetic. He seemed to be wearing a human suit.
Ooh, weird.
Weird, right?
This woman just got on a train and everybody on the train was an alien?
Yeah. But we'll get into it in a little bit, but it seems like it's more about her than it is she accidentally got on this train, right? Something about her. I wish she had described, like she said she was kind of wearing the suit. It doesn't ever say in the book what she saw underneath the suit. Like, was it like a reptile claw, or was it like a little gray finger, or, what was it?
Yeah.
So anyway, I would have liked that, but here we go. So she said they locked eyes with each other, and the man kind of had this unusual look in his eyes once again. He then turned away and looked immediately out the window. So I guess maybe he thought like, oh, she's seen me kind of thing, like something's wrong. So then she says she felt lightheaded, almost as if my brain were paralyzed, and she began to feel physically ill. And she was thinking like, oh, am I having a stroke and this is just part of this hallucination because my brain is like about to explode? What is happening here? And then she has this sort of intrinsic realization that this man was not human, nor the people around her in the car. Like, she felt like this fish out of water kind of situation, right? Mm-hmm. And then this panic begins to overtake her. Like, like, wrong place, wrong time, lady kind of thing. So she decides, all right, I got to get the fuck out of here. So next stop, I'm gone. I don't care how far away I am. I'm off this train. So
obviously,
the train, yeah, as you would. The train comes to the next stop, and she stands up. The strange man with the unraveling finger began to fidget and look uncomfortable. And as the train sort of comes to a complete stop, and Lorraine's sort of on her feet, the man suddenly beat her to it. He rose and exited the train at the opposite end of the car, like quick as a flash, like out of there. Like he almost like anticipated what she was about to do. So Lorraine decides then, all right, I don't want to exit with this guy. She's going to sit back down and keep riding. So she sits back down, train takes off again and starts to move. So now off the train on the platform, this man walked among the crowd outside, and he was staring directly at Lorraine through the window, like just holding his gaze on her in this odd fashion as he walked sort of past the train as it was starting to move. This is like a crazy like scene from a film almost.
Yeah, it's like she's being like hunted or watched or...
Yeah, it's like she's being watched, and maybe she's like, it's almost like these people are contacting her for some reason almost. Or just checking her out. She says odd things about her that she noticed after he got off the train, and this is kind of interesting because it's almost like there's this mental manipulation going on with her, where she starts to notice things later. So she says his clothes didn't fit. Somehow they were out of proportion from his body, whether they were too big or too small, I don't know. Anyway, so she said somehow too his eyes changed. Yet another one of the odd slippery qualities of her experience. So Dolan describes it as a slippery quality. So it is like this, like some sort of screen memory, or I don't know what's happening to her, but she's being manipulated in some way.
Snakes on a train. Sorry.
Snakes on a train, yeah.
Snoop Dogg was on that train.
Right.
Right on.
Snoop Dogg or...
He might be an alien.
Who was on Snakes on a
be.
Plane?
That's Samuel L.
Samuel L. Jackson.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. Motherfucker. So and here's where she finds out like all these people in cahoots, right? So she says, before the strange man was gone from view, the scarfed woman next to her also looked at him. She lifted her newspaper, which directly blocked the side of her face from Lorraine's view. She said she was, pretty sure this lady was communicating with this man, although she couldn't see what they were doing. And then the woman in the dark, she said, with the dark curly hair across from her, was also watching the man intently as he walked by. It was almost like they had this like communication going on.
Interesting.
So here's the weird part again. Like it just keeps getting weirder and weirder. I'd just say the weird part. The whole
yeah, this is the weird part.
Yeah, this is where it takes a turn. So the scarf woman turns to Lorraine, and she says to her, "We've been here for many, many years." Strange thing to say, right?
Okay. All right.
And at the time, Lorraine kind of like is a little like taken aback, didn't know what she meant, and she kind of interpreted this to mean at the time, we the British have been here for a long time. And then she was like, "Wait, this woman isn't British; she's American. What is happening here?" And it's almost like she's like confused, like there's confusion going on in her head, right? Then there's this follow-up statement, and Dolan sort of notes that unfortunately she can only recall this sketchily. Again, this kind of like confusion and manipulation going on. But she said something along the lines of, and she referred to Lorraine as being a star being or a star child. So it was like there was something special about this Lorraine character, and it wasn't that just she, stepped on the wrong train at the wrong time. After this point, Lorraine said the fear started to drain away from her, and she like, even though she was convinced that she was on this train with a bunch of like strange alien people, she just started feeling calm and relaxed. The train came to the next stop. Every single person on the car, like this packed car, roughly 30 to 40 people, stood up in unison.
Oh my
Within
God.
seconds, they were all exiting the car, all out of the car. No jostling, no sounds, just an exceptionally rapid and orderly exit from the train car. So fast that Lorraine could not recall the departure of the two strange women who were sharing her little area. She says it was the most organized, efficient departure from a train I've ever seen. Unbelievable and completely organized. During the rapid exit, she noted that the man who had been reading a magazine who smiled at her was acting as some sort of chaperone for the group. And this is where it doesn't say how she knew this, but she says he was human, definitely human, and she was sure of that.
Oh,
So
that's
there's like this-
interesting.
like this,
They have a hive
working with the
mind.
humans, right?
Yeah.
This is the
That's
integration,
Yeah.
Right.
right? This is the
infiltration.
integration, whatever. Yeah. Wow, that's creepy. Yeah, but I still don't know why, Like, why this woman, why this time, why nothing else? Hey, you're special. Bye-bye. That's it? That's all we get?
I'm almost positive the way this whole experience sort of pans out, there's got to be more. She's got to have, like, I don't know if she contacted Dolan after this event, but there's got to be, she's got to be experiencing more. Like, they've obviously singled her out for some reason.
Right.
And then, like, the rest of the story, that's basically it. All these people, exit the car. She's alone on the car then, like, literally by herself in this big train car. All these people got off at the same exit, and she said they were like ushered out by this one human man who was sort of showing them where to go. And then she has this odd reaction, which you do hear in abduction cases and other experiences with UFOs and stuff all the time, where there's like this missing time situation. But also, she just kind of sits down and says, I didn't think much more of it after that. I just kind of went home and sat down in front of the TV, and like, it was like this, just this, like I said, like this manipulation of her mind, just to calm her down and just kind of make her forget, basically.
Yeah.
And then it kind of hit her when she was sitting there, and she was like, "Wait, no, that was really weird. It really was weird." Like, she has this battle in her head. A friend of hers ends up coming down and hanging out with her. And she tells him what happened and why she's so confused. And instead of him being like shocked and like, wow, that was crazy, he just kind of took it in his stride. No big deal. Yeah, it's all right. But he has this strange little comment at the end where he says he's heard of rumors of a community in the UK that had people sprung up out of nowhere. And he said, according to the friend, the people who lived there never opened their doors and were never seen anywhere. They never sort of left their home. He couldn't remember the name or the location of this place. And he says, Dolan says, of the encounter itself, perhaps some may dismiss it as sort of the paranormal delusion of a young student living in a foreign country, but I had met with Lorraine while lecturing and spoke with her multiple times in detail about this event. At the time, she was rational, precise, and sober in her manner and description. So, you know, like you said in his interview, he really sort of only takes in, you know, he's able to kind of determine people who are sort of legitimate and their stories seem credible with people who are just kind of telling stories. And he seems to believe that Lorraine, at least, was on the level.
That's really interesting. But just, you're right. I do wonder if she's had more experiences or a follow-up, because it just seems so weird that they would make contact if this really happened and then nothing. Like, hey, you're special. Let's just weird you out for a bit and see what happens. Or like maybe there is something happening to her and she doesn't even know it. You know, especially if there's a human chaperone involved, like they're monitoring her for some reason.
It does.
Right.
It does feel like this kind of screen memory that maybe even what she remembers is pretty far off from what actually happened. You know, like she just remembers this bizarre story of this odd interaction with these people, but really, what happened was some sort of abduction. Maybe, I don't know.
Yeah, it's very strange.
Who knows?
It's crazy. All right, Josh, what you got? Something down and dirty?
Yes. The answer is yes. And I think Lorraine, it was a screen memory, and I guarantee she's had other experiences. It seems like anyone who's had a significant contactee experience has had multiple. Usually, this just seems to be the case, just like what I'm about to break down. The origin of this was in Alien Agendas, and I did a little more research on this character in this story, and it is super fascinating and perfect for the Cosmic Cantina. You'll understand why at the end. Okay, so in the book Alien Agendas, he actually references another book in a UFO researcher from Australia. You might know Matt, because all Australians know each other, named Bill Chalker. Bill Chalker.
Oh, I do actually. I don't know him personally, but I know
Bill
that
Shocker?
Chalker.
Bill Shocker?
Chalker, like chalk.
Shocker?
With an ER. Let's go with Shocker. So
Okay.
this book is called The Hair of the Alien. And Dolan gets into the end of the story I'm going to tell is the part in Dolan's book. But this actually quote by Timothy Good. He goes, "This is the most convincing case for alien abduction." The book is written by Bill Chalker, and it focuses on a guy named Peter Khoury. Khoury? Whatever. Peter. We're going to call him Peter.
Okay.
So,
Peter.
right. Let's start in 1988 in the suburbs of Sydney, Australia. Peter was back home after living in Lebanon. They grew up in Lebanon, but then they moved to Australia. He stayed in Lebanon and kind of was a troublemaker and finally moved back home, and his parents were psyched. He's back home. It's late at night at 11, random one night, and he's watching TV in a chair, his brother's favorite chair, which is a detail that will matter in a second, and with his dad. His brother was sleeping in his room for whatever, wakes up, comes out, is like, "Hey, can I watch the movie out here? And you go watch the movie in the bedroom." And he's like, "Sure, random, whatever. I'll go do that." Peter goes to the bedroom, lays down, and boom! Immediately, something grabs his ankles. He's like, and his body slowly goes paralyzed from the ankles all the way up to his head. He has no idea what's going on. He's freaking out. He's just filled with fear. He's like, "Oh my God, I'm going paralyzed just for living like a bad life." They were a Lebanese family. They might have been really religious. And he's like, "Is this a payback for being kind of a troublemaker in my 20s? What is happening? I don't like this." He starts to panic, and then it gets worse. At the end of his bed, he sees 3 to 4 foot tall creatures in cloaks with black wrinkled faces, and he's just filled with fear.
No Botox for them.
No Botox. Also, you know what's randomly interesting is that they had. I haven't heard many aliens being described as black skinned, and the reason why I bring that up because there is people like on Twitter and who are claiming that the entire UFOlogy is just racist and whitewashed because there's no black aliens. So I thought that was interesting that there was like here's a case of someone actually reporting black faced aliens. Anyways, but it gets even.
Okay, you can't say that either. Okay. Anyway, keep going.
So Then there's two more beings appear. These two tall with big black eyes, narrow chin, and goldish yellow color. And suddenly his heart stops racing. He's filled with love. He feels at peace. He's not concerned at all. Obviously, they're manipulating him. He starts to get telepathic messages from them, and he can just, through their eyes, he can like feel their love, like a motherly instinct. And they were also kind of like dressed like doctors. They had like little weird surgical masks on their lips, just really tiny masks. And he just felt at peace. And then this is what they said to him. They go, "Don't worry, this will be like the last time." I'll come back to that.
What?
He's like, "Oh, okay." Well, what's about to happen next is freaky, but he wasn't concerned about it. They brought up like a this flexible crystal tube that like a needle inside of it or something weird, and placed it against his temple, the side of his head, and they injected him something, and he passed out.
Oh my God.
So he's like, "What? Whoa. Okay." So the reason why I started with this story is because it like a lot of these contactee people, it's like an event sparks their memory, and they start to realize that this has been happening for a while. So to that moment, he was kind of just like, whatever. And then he starts to realize these past events. I mean, he went to the doctor for this. There was a puncture wound. They didn't find anything inside of him, blah, blah, blah. But he started to realize, like, when did this happen? And it brought him right back down to 1971 in Lebanon, where he was playing on top of this apartment complex, which they do every day, and they make games on top of the roof for the kids to play. And he remembers opening the door with a bunch of kids, going outside, and just seeing all the kids frozen, staring up, just frozen. He looks up, but he's not frozen, and there's an egg-shaped craft there. And then through it, like a translucent window, he kind of sees two tall, thin beings. Couldn't really make them out, but similar description to what he saw that night in 1988 in Australia. I'm not saying it's the same beings, but it seemed familiar to me. He remembered that. Okay, now we're going to fast forward to 1992. So now he's remembering these past events. There's other events, too, that his mom and dad knew about, and he even brings up this guy, Peter. He's had a long history. But in 1992 in Melbourne, where he seems like he moved to, he just woke up in the middle of the night. And this is the story that's described in the book, and I'm definitely going to read a page straight out of Dolan's book, which is really cool, which goes into the evidence. So there's these two alien women looking at him at the end of his bed. One is, I guess he describes as Chinese looking. They're both naked. And one is a blonde woman who's over 6 feet tall, is very strong, looks very strong, but also very beautiful, and has really bigger than normal eyes. He doesn't really describe the Chinese woman's eyes.
The other thing about this book too is he has put illustrations. I think this guy drew illustrations of these women as well, and so throughout the book, different people have. He's got photos throughout it, but there's interesting illustrations from people who have supposedly come into contact with these beings, and some of them are really, really wacky looking. But it's pretty cool to see all the different beings that pop up. But yeah, these two specifically are in the book too. So.
But
they draw pictures.
But they look human.
They're hot.
But they
look human, but clearly off with the eyes, and something's wrong. Yeah, and they're hot. It's like this tall, blonde, strong woman, at the end of his bed, and she's really strong. She pulls him close to her breast like multiple times, and he keeps pulling away. Peter's like, I don't know about this. This is not cool. And eventually she just shoves his head. She's like trying to initiate sex, and he's like, what? And eventually he just panics and bites her nipple, like bites a portion right of her nipple right off. And he's like, oh, and he comes back, and then and she's looking at him, and the woman just calmly like looks at the other the Chinese-looking alien, and that's gonna get me in trouble, probably that statement. And then he thinks like they're talking to each other through telepathy, and he starts choking like massively on this like alien nipple, and then he blacks out.
Oh my God.
He blacks out, and they're like,
this is like the worst night at the strip club ever.
Yeah.
So the lady seemed confused. He passed out. But the next day, he wakes up, and he's like, no one's going to believe this. And he starts examining himself. And then he notices around his shaft, right below the helmet. Actually, I don't know that detail. I just want to throw it in there. On his shaft, tightly wrapped around, not just randomly in his clothes, tightly wrapped around is a hair, a blonde hair. And he's like, okay, well, what is this about? He unravels it. And he gets it genetically tested. So I'm going to read to you the results of that crazy thing. So I'm going to read directly from his book, but then he's also quoting in his book the other book. So I'm quoting a quote of a quote. Does that make sense? Yep. But it's just so I don't want to get it wrong.
It's a meta quote.
Yeah. This is what he said. Okay. The genetic analysis on this hair. I'm going to read this verbatim. It's really interesting. The analysis determined that the hair in question was very unusual. As Chalker put it, The analysis confirmed the hair came from someone who was biologically close to normal human genetics, but of an unusual racial type, a rare Chinese Mongoloid type, one of the rarest human lineages known, that lies further from the human mainstream than any other except for African pygmies and aboriginals. Another oddity.
Mongolian? Is that what you said?
Did you say Mongolian?
Mongolioid. He said Chinese Mongolioid. It's not.
Yeah.
It's Mongolian. Yes, for all intents and purposes, Mongolian.
Okay.
Another oddity was the hair color. Considering the ethnic group from which it seemed to come, it should have been black, not blonde. Moreover, it was determined that the hair was not bleached or colored in any way. Chalker later had additional tests done on this strand of hair. Not only did it have the unusual DNA profiles of a rare Chinese DNA in the hair shaft, in the rare Basque and Gaelic
Stop saying
type
shaft, by the way.
DNA in the hair root, but it also had indications of the CCR5 gene deletion factor.
What's that?
This last feature, wrote Chalker, is quite rare in the human species, being confined to a small percentage of people of northeastern European descent. However, its presence would allow such beings to carry out intrusive activities amongst humans without concern for diseases such as HIV and smallpox. None of these factors are easy to explain, but would seem to be the product of sophisticated genetic engineering. Okay, I was jumping in and out of Dolan and also him quoting, so I apologize if I didn't get all that right. But that is really fascinating. So if they're banging humans, they made it so they can't get the HIV, they can't get STDs. And I just thought, and this was really, really analyzed. And there's a big book on this and everything. It's one of those cases, like, I consider myself like a armchair researcher, you know, and I just love when I come across stuff I haven't really heard before. Not that this is unknown in the ufology, but this was so interesting. The fact that it has evidence. I mean, there's a piece of hair they can't figure out. And all that stuff just... Yeah, really, really shocked me. This guy, Peter, had a wild story and banged a tall Nordic alien, which is cool.
Well, I got something to say about that because everyone has heard of Amazon women, right? The idea of Amazonian women, but they don't come from the Amazon. Yeah. Amazon women are from northeastern descent, and the Greeks feared them. That's why they wanted to destroy the Amazon women, that they fled to Mongolia and mated with the Mongolians. And to this day, there's still blonde hair, blue-eyed Mongolians. That is true.
Wow.
That is absolutely true.
Oh, okay.
I wrote a story about it at one point.
Amazonian women?
Well, I mean, at first it was a
really...
mythology, but then they realized that they traced the mythology genetically to some of the Mongolian people today. Like, you'll just come across a blonde-haired, blue-eyed Mongolian person.
Wow. I didn't know that. That's what
makes
interesting.
that story even weirder, because the idea of this Greek mythology that they ended up kind of proving that this tribe of really strong women existed and then fled to Mongolia because that has some validity. But now it's like a whole nother realm of existence if now we're talking about extraterrestrials or interdimensional beings.
Yeah, it seems like it's a genetic, it's like I wouldn't say man-made, but it's like an actual genetic creation of a bunch of different, strong DNA pieces that it sounds like
right.
are impervious to virus and disease. And I mean, that sounds pretty cool.
Yeah.
Yeah, and they're like usually perfect looking. They're usually gorgeous, 6 feet, and like the picture over your right is like amazing. Like their breasts are always like bigger. It's like this like I don't know, like superhero woman. Like it's never like an ugly chubby woman or a dude with a small penis. It's always like porn star dick. And like, well, actually, I don't know that. I haven't heard much. I haven't heard many penises described in ufology. But the women are always like a 10. Like, is that just because males are influencing ufology too much? So like they're dreaming up like these perfect women, or
I'm going to do some research into that tonight. Let me write that down. Alien penises.
Well, I mean, not to keep going on this Amazonian thing, but the idea of Wonder Woman, right? Like, so the first Wonder Woman movie that just came out, right? Not 1984, but the one before, where they have them living in an island, and they're worried Ares is going to find them. Remember, it's like a tribe of women. They all somehow are badass. They're like, they can shoot anybody with an arrow. They're flying through the air with their horses, like all this craziness, right? That's built on this mythology of these kind of superhero type women. And the Greeks were so afraid that they were going to take over their society that I don't know what happened. They drove them into this area. They kind of hid out in where the Mongolian people are. But that's like something that's in our mythology, like this Amazonian woman who's like super strong, has these superhuman type of supernatural type of stuff. I mean, look at all the Marvel characters. They all look like what we're talking about. Every single one of them.
Were they ever described as
Love
gods? Were they ever described as gods? Do you know?
The Amazonians, or
I mean, they were definitely described as beautiful, huge, tall, blonde, fierce women. That it didn't really fit with the patriarch society, right? They
weren't petite and quiet.
Yeah, they weren't going quietly into the night. So they definitely had. I mean, I don't think that they used the word gods, but they were of goddess quality. But remember, like, how the Greek, I don't mean to get too ancient civilization here, but in Greek mythology, there was Athena, who was a goddess, but she was a goddess of warriors. And then there was like the Medusa, right? Like the crazy woman with the hair. So the goddess turned into just like a sexy woman instead of, and transitioned from a very strong woman to a very like, I'm a goddess and I'm beautiful and I sit here.
very feminine. Yeah, I know what you're saying.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So, I mean, at one point that could have been the case, but then, society changed, civilization changed.
It just got me thinking about, because I reread a bunch of the stuff that the TTSA, and in particular Tom DeLonge were talking about, where they were describing these beings come down and basically decrying themselves as gods, basically to rule humanity. Mm-hmm. And it just kind of like hit me as like, I wonder if they were part of that whole deal. But yeah, there's all Greek gods
I
and
don't
stuff.
ever remember like the whole thing of like the Amazon women trying to. I don't even think they were trying to take over or anything. I think they were just like, leave us alone or we're going to kill you.
Yeah.
That just did not work in the patriarch society. Those women must be conquered.
Well, it's just weird too. Why are they called the Amazonians if they're from Europe and they moved to Mongolia? That's just a weird.
Well, I think that was a Greek name for them, but then
the
I don't know.
Amazon is named from that. It's not. It wasn't the other way around.
Oh,
Yeah.
okay. I should have paid more attention in ancient history.
I know, like when you hear Amazonian women, you think they like live in the jungle or something, but
Yeah.
actually they're blonde, northeastern descent. They ride horses, they kill people, badass.
Go.
Watch out!
Yeah, hell yeah.
I love
They
that.
just come in. Sorry, I had this vision. They just come into a village and they're like, "You, sir, you are going to have sex with me." Okay.
Don't bite my nipple.
Oh, stop! Don't make me do that. Stop it. Stop it.
All right. Okay. So wait, this is super fascinating, but more importantly, I think, the reason we really wanted to kind of take this take on what's been happening with disclosure is that we're always focused on what is the government doing, but we haven't really ever talked about what could be the possible agendas of these alien beings that are making contact with us. And of course, just like governments of the world, they're not just one. There isn't just one agenda, there's several.
Right.
And that doesn't really give us a clear-cut answer, and it makes it more complicated, but it does make you think about all the different ways that these communications are happening and why they're happening. And more importantly, that I don't think we can just be focused on the government disclosing things. I think we need to think about the bigger picture, that there's a lot of agendas going on here. And what do we want to be as humans in this piece? I think that we need to think about this as knowledge and empower ourselves to not have to be swayed by either agenda.
Well said.
Here, here.
I'll get behind that. Do you have a pamphlet
right.
or something I could buy?
I'm working on it.
Okay. Sweet.
All right. Cheers. Be safe out there. Don't get abducted. And if you do, take the genetic sample and get it tested and get back to us.
Yeah. That dick hair. Goodbye. I ended with dick hair.